can subscribe to The Spectator for 12 weeks for only £12 for our print and online editions, plus get 6 months of digital access free to The Telegraph. Go to spectator.co.uk/telegraph.
Hello and welcome to Spectator Out Loud. Every week, a few of our writers read out their pieces in the magazine. This week, we're going to be joined by Douglas Murray, who talks about how right-wing candidates can be life-changing for the BBC and other public institutions. We also hear from Sam Leith in defence of wokeness. Meanwhile, Melissa Kite defends fly tipping. And at the very end, Toby Young on why Laurence Fox's new political party is a good idea. First, Douglas Murray.
A beautiful noise rang out last week in the wake of the news that the government is considering Charles Moore to become the new chairman of the BBC and Paul Dacre to be the head of the broadcasting watchdog Ofcom. The noise was the sound of the British left wailing that toys they thought were theirs alone might now, under a Conservative government, finally go to identifiable Conservatives. The former editor of The Guardian, Alan Rusbridger, shrieked that this is what an oligarchy looks like. This and similar tweets were presumably sent from the lodgings of the Oxford College that Rusbridger was made principal of 5 years ago. Others who screamed themselves sick included BBC employees who briefed that Moore's appointment would shatter morale. People will leave. For there can be no greater way to refute accusations of institutional leftism in the BBC than for the corporation's employees to threaten to resign en masse in response to a Conservative appointment. Elsewhere, Have I Got News for You tweeted out that this would be the end for the BBC, which is as funny a joke as that show has mustered in the present century. Of course, there is no certainty Moore or Dacre will take up either job, and even less certainty that if they do so, they will be able to turn around the relevant organisations. But the announcements are a good sign, because they suggest that the Conservatives might finally be showing some fight in the culture and institutional wars that Conservatives have traditionally lost. It is a surprise. For, after all, a year into office, there had been very few indications that the Johnson government would be any more stalwart in appointing Conservatives than its two predecessors. David Cameron's government managed to see William Shawcross appointed as the chair of the Charity Commission and Andrew Roberts as a trustee of the National Portrait Gallery. Theresa May fared less well. The attempt to put Toby Young onto a higher education quango ground British politics to a near standstill until Young withdrew his candidacy. The same government's efforts to put Roger Scruton into an unpaid role heading an advisory commission on buildings led to even greater pain. In recent years, some of us had given up on the idea that the Conservatives could appoint any Conservatives into positions in public life. As such, the Moore and Dacre appointments would be a much-needed volley, one that would demonstrate that the culture wars can no longer be fought and won solely by the radical left. In the wider country, there are signs of exasperation over how one-sided the cultural battle has been. Last weekend, the actor Laurence Fox announced the setting up of a new political party, Reclaim, to push back against the left's stranglehold over every cultural and other institution in this country. Though it is unlikely to pose much electoral threat to the Conservatives, it could help remind them that assaults on our history and culture are not viewed with defeatism or equanimity by all of the British public. Still, the question is not whether Dacre and Moore can be appointed, but what support they might get and what other phalanxes might be brought in behind them. How, in short, to ensure that they are not one-offs, but part of a concerted march back through the institutions. There is plenty to do. For, noble though it is to focus on the BBC, huge amounts of the cultural and political weather in this country are set not by the BBC, but by the people whom they report on and go to. In Quango after Quango, it is the same old story. The Victims Commissioner, Vera Baird, for instance, is a former Labour MP whose every statement and action fits the old Blairite agenda. Yet it was the Conservative government that appointed her to her current position in June 2019. But it isn't just about individuals. It is about the cultural attitude currently embedded at the roots of the civil service and every government appointment. When the Blair government instituted the diversity agenda, the Conservatives went along with it. Cameroon Conservatives saw it not as a right or left issue, but simply a forwards or backwards issue, a progressive versus regressive one. That thought rot now runs deeper than almost any other aspiration in the civil service. Indeed, when permanent secretaries write their objectives for their roles, the one thing they all have in common, far above the well-being of the country, is the promotion of the diversity agenda. There are signs that the chessboard is being rearranged. The dismissal of Jonathan Slater from his position as permanent secretary at the Department of Education was one good sign. Slater was, and still is, one of the great Twitterers about diversity. But it is not enough just to change the figures on the board. It is necessary to change the game. Slater may have gone, but his former colleagues still find themselves in the midst of a pandemic and looming depression, being sent on diversity training and racial bias awareness training, as though these gods sit above all others as the goal and indeed purpose of the British state. And then there is the issue of the pilgrims, publicly funded workers who, though paid for by the taxpayer, double up as union officers and organisers. Like so much else, the Cameron government ducked dealing with this scandalous arrangement. But if the Johnson administration wants not just to save money, but to demonstrate a real change in the wind, it would sweep all these people off the public payroll. The last Labour government rigged almost every institution in this country with enormous craft and cunning. Even now, from the National Lottery Fund to the National Trust, we have institution after institution in this country run by people whose interests are opposed to those of the general public, and aspiring more than anything else to the hideous, divisive, and now clearly failing woke agenda. Dacre and Moore are good early warning shots. But if the Johnson government wants to do something meaningful, it should not just follow through on their appointments. It should follow them up with a fusillade every bit as relentless and long-lasting as the Labour one, the repercussions of which this country still suffers from.
That was Douglas Murray, and now Sam Leith.
We've been reading an awful lot about wokeness recently. Nobody, I notice, seems to be much in favour of it. In fact, the sharpest pens of the right seem to stab at more or less nothing else these days. Stab, stab, stab they go. Many incisions are made, and much ink and sawdust is spilled. So, being a believer in giving peace a chance, I'd like to sit for a moment on the bar stool still pleasantly warm from my colleague Rod's momentarily departed bottom to offer a word or two in wokeness's defence. I worry, you see, that it might be a bit of an Aunt Sally. Thing is, woke is a term that you now only ever see used as a sneer. It performs precisely the role that politically correct and loony left did in the late 1980s and early 1990s, reducing a whole range of positions to the punchline for a rather threadbare joke. Remember when stand-up comics and tabloid columnists saw one-legged black lesbian single mothers as a symbol of the hilarious lunacy of political correctness gone mad? Never mind that such people existed, and I dare say had a pretty tough time of it, and weren't intrinsically any funnier than the two-legged variety. We're near as damn it back there. One of my late grandfather's wise sayings was, "Nobody ever destroyed a man by sneering." The culture wars are now being conducted almost entirely through sneering, and as long as they are, they will remain unwinnable. Now, if you want to crush the left, and goodness me, why wouldn't you, woke won't do it, because it's not an argument so much as a retreat to the comfort zone, a sort of ideological thumb-sucking. Using woke as a catch-all term of derogation may elicit sniggers from your own side, but it betrays a dismal incuriosity about what it is that you're actually opposing. And know your enemy remains good advice. You see supposed intellectuals on the right, for instance, denouncing their opponents as Marxists and postmodernists, without pausing to note that these are contradictory types of thought, just as democratic socialism and anti-capitalism are quite different animals, just as within anti-racism or queer rights campaigning or feminism there are many different views. Now, you may see these as the order of precedence between a louse and a flea, but it's surely worth knowing what you're disagreeing with before you write the whole passel off as a fashionable, self-righteous, virtue-signalling lefties who would have us all singing "Bar, bar, green sheep." Fashionable, self-righteous, or virtue-signalling, all used in collocation with woke, aren't terms that oppose a position. They instead impute a motive, and rather defensively so at that. To do it as a conjugation, I am principled, you are inflexible, he is self-righteous. And why wouldn't you want to be woke in any case? In its original sense, as minted in black activism in the States, to be woke was to be aware. It was to show just that curiosity about the world that its use as a sneer declines to bother with. One of the basic contentions of the non-loony left is this: a social setup that systematically gives some people a raw deal doesn't always make it obvious that it's doing so. We get used to it. This is a contention to which anybody arguing that it's stupid to cancel historical figures for holding views that were widespread in their own age should surely find it easy to subscribe. To take a well-worn analogy, we swim in a worldview like a fish swims in water. The fish doesn't have a concept of water because it's all the poor thing has ever known. To be woke is to go, aha, this is water. Caroline Criado Perez's recent book, Invisible Women, gives some good examples. Men have for so long been treated as the default human specimen that many people, including women, don't even notice the absurdity of this. So the medical advice on the symptoms of a heart attack, for example, describes how men experience it. But it turns out that women's heart attacks manifest differently. Crash test dummies and seatbelts are modelled on the male body shape. Office central heating systems are typically adjusted to male body temperatures. And so on. To be woke is to notice this stuff and perhaps want to do something about it. Rennie Edo-Lodge's Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race seeks to do something similar in another arena. It's a thoughtful attempt to explain what is meant by structural racism and why it tends to be invisible to its beneficiaries. And you know what? I was put onto it by my 70-something white South African-born father. He said it changed his view of the world. He took the time to read and think about an unfamiliar point of view, and I guess he got woke. In a broader sense, then, you could say that to be woke is to show curiosity about other people, to aspire to enlarge your range of sympathy. It is to take an interest in how the world may look from another perspective, and in that respect, the aspiration to be woke is in line with the basic project of the Enlightenment, to question received ideas and see if your assumptions are susceptible to disproof. There are many good reasons to want to give that a shot, of which self-respect is only one. Incuriosity will come back to bite you. Think of poor silly Laurence Fox, who thought that casting Sikhs as soldiers on the Western Front in 1917 was evidence of loony left political correctness in the filmmakers. Turned out there were rather a lot of Sikhs fighting in the First World War. The fact he didn't think that there were, couldn't be bothered to investigate, and looked silly when proved wrong, might have led a subtler mind to wonder whether his impressions of history were a bit simplistic. It might have made him think, this stuff, could it be water? Now, there are many on the woke left, be it said, who are in its proper sense not woke at all. There's nothing woke about caricaturing everyone on the right as a fascist, a phobe, or what have you. The non-idiotic lefty will know the difference between a Burkean conservative and an acolyte of Ayn Rand. The non-idiotic lefty will see that there's more to an honest reckoning with the past than cancelling everyone who was alive at the time of slavery and didn't go on a Black Lives Matter march right there and then. But you don't engage the non-idiotic lefty by tilting Quixote-like at the behaviour of his most idiotic fellow traveller. That tribal incuriosity appears to be everywhere, and the national conversation is much the poorer for it. So let's all stop sneering and get woke, eh?
That was Sam Leith. Melissa Kite now.
The pile of fly tipping was dumped in the night as usual, right against the 5-bar gate. I arrived to feed the horses and found 7 fridges and a pile of mattresses blocking the entrance to the field. I raised my eyes to heaven and said, "Thank you, God." The rotting mattresses and busted, filthy fridges lying with their doors open blocked almost the entire pull-in, the field gate and the stile. I believe Nicholas van Hoogstraten once piled up a load of old fridges to block walkers from looking into his garden from a footpath. Well, maybe I know how he felt. No rambler, no matter how many National Trust stickers he has in his car window, can park up to ramble around my horses and cause havoc with 7 fridges piled up against the gate. By the way, I see the National Trust's lavish latest TV advert depicts a silent stream with a caption suggesting we all need peace and quiet. Yes, but what peace and quiet have National Trust members allowed me to have for the past 6 months as they run rampant through the Surrey countryside? None. As the builder boyfriend and I stood among the fridges, 2 walkers marched past tutting their disapproval. One of them took out his phone and photographed the registration of our car. "Yeah, that's right," said the BB as they walked off. "All that came out of a Volvo." If the fly tipping backlog is big enough, it will take the council a while to come and shift this lot. I know Mayor Giuliani had a lot of success with his broken windows policy, keeping things so nice in New York neighbourhoods that even yobs didn't want to drop litter. But I tend to the view that when you are dealing with the problems of Surrey, the best deterrent is to make the place look a right dump. That way, the middle-class trespassers don't want to walk their cockapoos around your field because it doesn't look all chocolate boxy, while the fly tippers never tip on top of fly tipping for reasons I've yet to fully understand. It seems to be a hard and fast rule. Perhaps there is honour among fly tippers, and they don't like to tip on top of each other's tipping patches. In any case, the BB who understands these things assured me no self-respecting night tipper will go near my field entrance now, and hopefully no day tripper will either. We kicked around the fridges and found one of them was covered in fridge magnets. The builder bee likes to do detective work on fly tipping and he's very good at it. One time he forensically examined a big dump of rubble outside his field until he unearthed a receipt leading him to a well-spoken professional chap in Worcester Park. He rang him and interrogated him expertly to find that he had just had some building waste removed by a clearance company. The BB demanded the details, and when the man refused, he informed him that if he didn't tell him, he would, that very afternoon, bring all the rubble back to his house in Worcester Park and dump it on his lawn. Whereupon the man divulged the clearance company's full details and the BB rang them to ask if they would do a job for him. Delighted, they asked for the details and he gave them the address of his field. The man on the other end of the line began to stutter, but the BB held firm. "That's right, you're going to come back and clear the rubbish you dumped by my horses. And when you're done, I won't call the police and give them all the evidence so they can come and crush your truck." The fly tipper duly turned up, bang on the time arranged, and meticulously cleared up the rubbish he had fly tipped. Hopeful of another such victory, we kicked around the broken fridges, noticing baling twine, which suggested they'd been stored in a rural lock-up somewhere, house clearance after house clearance, until the tow rags had enough fridges to warrant a nighttime dumping expedition. They charge £30 to £40 a go for fridges at local authority tips, and nearly as much for a mattress. So even the professional clearance companies see no harm in getting the council to clear them for free by doing it this way. We scrutinised the fridge with the magnets, which spelt out rude words and phrases badly. It also bore a sticker for a famous gym company. I suggested we put a photo on Facebook. Do you recognise this fridge? But do we really want to do the council's job for them and find the culprits? Not really. We want to take this precious gift of respite and enjoy some blessed peace and security, Hoogstraten style.
That was Melissa Kite, and now Toby Young.
From the moment I started criticising the government's handling of the coronavirus crisis, people have been urging me to start an anti-lockdown party. The idea would be to run candidates in the local elections in May, particularly in those areas that have been under almost permanent lock and key for the past 6 months, such as Leicester. They might not win, but they could bleed enough support from the Conservative candidates to make the government think twice about its forever lockdown policy. But I've resisted. For one thing, I don't have the time. Running the Free Speech Union and posting daily updates to my Lockdown Skeptics blog, as well as trying to earn a living as a journalist, means I'm already working 14 hours a day. Caroline would divorce me if I took on anything else. Then there's the Electoral Commission. I've seen the way it has gone after friends who campaigned for leave in the EU referendum. Above all, there's the sheer nastiness of politics. Starting a new party is like sticking a big target on your back, inviting the most vicious, malignant people in the country to take a shot at you. That's not much fun, particularly if you've got 4 kids at school. So I take my hat off to Laurence Fox, who's doing exactly what I'm too cowardly to do. The 42-year-old actor is starting a party called Reclaim that will stand up for liberty, particularly freedom of speech, and is unashamedly patriotic. It's been described as the UKIP of the culture wars, but that's not quite right, as Laurence voted for Remain and won't be campaigning for less immigration. He's less of a G&T in the saloon bar type, more an Aperol Spritz in the beach bar man. If Nigel Farage is Terry Thomas, Laurence is David Niven. There's also something appealingly normal about him. He hasn't been harbouring political ambitions for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. Rather, he's been propelled into the front line by the government's unwillingness to do anything about the takeover of the civil service, the police, the BBC, universities, schools, museums and galleries by the woke left. He reminds me of the Peter Finch character in Network, who leans out of his office window and screams, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore." Laurence is in the process of registering Reclaim with the Electoral Commission and intends to contest some seats next May. Many people have pointed out that Britain's first-past-the-post electoral system means new parties rarely get anywhere, but that is to ignore the inroads that proportional representation has made. Elections to England's regional chambers, including the London Assembly, are based on a form of PR, as are elections to the devolved parliaments. More importantly, Reclaim doesn't have to win anything in order to make a difference. UKIP only managed to win a single parliamentary seat, yet it achieved its main political objective. All Laurence needs to do is persuade the Conservative Party that if it doesn't become more robust on culture war issues, it will lose votes to him in red wall seats. Not enough for Reclaim to win, but enough for Labour to come up through the middle. And Laurence's initiative has already had a backbone-stiffening effect on Number 10, with its comms team frantically briefing out that Boris was planning to appoint Charles Moore to run the BBC and Paul Dacre to run Ofcom at the same time that the story broke about the new party. With his backbenchers growing restive, Boris is particularly vulnerable to the charge that he hasn't done enough to protect Britain's statues and monuments from marauding gangs of Black Lives Matter protesters, or to defend Britain's history from those who portray it as an unending litany of exploitation and oppression. If the new party starts creeping up in the polls, Boris will have to do something to shoot Reclaim's Fox. Of course, there are other things the Conservatives could do to spike Laurence's guns. I had lunch with him on Monday and asked him whether he was prepared for the Black Ops team Central Office has no doubt already dispatched to take him out. Fending off the wokerati on Twitter is one thing, but the Tory party's character assassins are likely to be more deadly. He said he was ready to take on all comers. "They can punch me in the face as often as they like. I'll just get right back up again," he said. I could almost hear the theme from the Dam Busters drifting across the table.
That was Toby Young. Thanks for listening to this podcast, and do join us again next week.
You can subscribe to The Spectator for 12 weeks for only £12 for our print and online editions, plus get 6 months of digital access free to The Telegraph. Go to spectator.co.uk/Telegraph. /telegraph